fascists are very much for the symbolic, the dramatic, the mythological, and the cinematic. I think this does come as a surprise to many, not because the mere presence of racists and the far right is a surprise these days in Britain, but because it seems to have gone quite rapidly towards explicit symbols and shows of fascism in Scotland.
Now, columns of men dressed in black marching in total silence through the streets of Glasgow and Edinburgh. It looks like a grainy news broadcast from 1930s Europe, but this is happening today in 2026. Tensions are rising across Scotland after these self-styled Blackshirts staged a series of silent protests outside the Scottish Parliament and also Glasgow Cathedral, leaving behind wreaths with messages in Italian, which translate to "the end justifies the means." It comes exactly 90 years after Britain passed the Public Order Act to ban political uniforms and paramilitary drilling, yet the police have made no arrests. Are we witnessing a new and dangerous evolution of British fascism? Well, let's speak to Dr. Aaron Winter, who's a senior lecturer in sociology, focusing on race and anti-racism. He's at Lancaster University. Dr. Aaron Winter, good evening to you.
Good evening. Thank you for having me on.
This sounds like something from a film, and there's some great footage at thetimes.com to look at on this. It all looks pretty worrying. Groups of men, columns, 4 distinct columns, marching in this uniform. It feels like, this is a deliberate throwback to the 1930s. What is the goal of using that aesthetic?
Well, absolutely. And I think evoking or comparing it to a film is quite apt, because fascists are very much for the symbolic, the dramatic, the mythological, and the cinematic. I think this does come as a surprise to many, not because the mere presence of racists and the far right is a surprise these days in Britain, but because it seems to have gone quite rapidly towards explicit symbols and shows of fascism in Scotland, which has long had or at least in recent years, has had less of a presence of the far right and a less of a sort of an upward rise of the far right than England, for example. And they seem to have gone straight into explicit fascism. There was a number of weeks ago some far right mobilization in George Square that corresponded to the riots that were occurring in Belfast. But this was, it did appear to be quite isolated.
Okay. I mean, are fascists, do you think, are the far right, are they more emboldened than they were sort of 15 to 20 years ago? Are cultural elements, cultural stories and incidents within society feeding into this? Absolutely.
I think that for a long time, racists and the far right have been seen as a sort of a scourge, a threat, a sort of a symbol of a bygone era. But over the past, I think, 10 to 15 years, we've seen an increasing not only rise in resurgence, but also incredible mainstreaming that instead of taking away their power, has actually legitimized and emboldened them. And they've been mainstreamed largely with the sort of establishment parties, particularly in England, as well as elsewhere in Europe, co-opting their ideas as if around Muslims, around migration, as if that was going to take away their power and reduce the risk. I think that's a very flawed theory, but it has seemed to have emboldened them. So now what we have is the far right rising in the polls, taking positions in government and on the streets. But what has happened in addition to that, or through this process, is more moderate versions of the far right, or more mainstream variations, which can take the guise of liberalism even, or tolerance, or patriotism, have moved the Overton window to the right, to the extent that actually evoking Hitler and fascism and explicit forms of racism and genocidal language has actually returned and become, if not acceptable, not something I guess governments or officials are willing to crack down on or prosecute.
Let's just point out the elements here that relate back to Italian fascism. So the dark clothing and columns of four, they all hark back, don't they, to Italian fascism. What about the quote? How does that fit into this? The end justifies the means.
Well, not only, and I should just say that not only is it evoking Italian fascism, but there's been a lot of references to Oswald Mosley and the British Union of Fascists as well. So our own variation on that. But the term, there's been a lot of interpretation of that. I'm keen not to give a definitive one, but I think a lot of the analysis points to the idea that for fascists, the end, what is the rebirth of the nation, rebirth of the people, or the sort of, the Aryan people, or whoever they want to identify, justifies whatever action they can take. And as we know historically, fascists often evoke and literally employ a sort of an idea of a cleansing fire, where they use violence, dehumanization, and genocidal sort of practices to achieve what they want to achieve. And I'm not saying that's explicitly what they're saying here, but they're evoking that kind of mythology, that kind of rhetoric. At the same time, there was a message about apologies, and that's been largely taken to mean an apology for either opposing fascism during the war, or apologies for betraying the country, the people, the nation, the civilization, the culture, by allowing immigrants in and changing the society.
Look, it's great to hear from you. Thank you for helping us try and wrap our heads around that. As we've said, no arrests so far. It is something that the Scottish Police, I'm sure, have their eye on. Senior lecturer in sociology, focusing on race and anti-racism at Lancaster University, Dr. Aaron Winter, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.